Hey pilots, the Drake Corsair is out, and it can be a struggle to fly in atmosphere, so I wanted to talk about how it flies and maybe how it can be a little easier for you. First thing we're going to do, being up here in space above Microtech, so we're going to look at what the thruster power is just in 0G. So first thing I'm going to do, straightforward, 5 Gs of thrust, retro 2.3, vertical strafe 2.2, lateral strafe about 1.7 Gs in each direction. Next, I'm going to turn the VTOL on. That is going to rotate 2 of the main thrusters downward. So the VTOL on, we're down about 3.3 Gs forward thrust and about 3.9 Gs vertical thrust, so significantly increasing the vertical thrust. You can see on the joystick overlays as I give inputs here, so you can sort of see what I'm doing. Now let's head down to the surface on Microtech. It's going to be the toughest environment for the Corsair because we've got about 1 G of gravity and 1 atmosphere pressure, so the thickest atmosphere we've got. The atmosphere is thinner up here at about 7,000 meters, so to really put the Corsair through its paces, let's go to the lowest possible altitude, where the atmospheric pressure is the highest, and so we'll experience the most drag. The shape of the Corsair, aerodynamically, it has the wings to the rear, which actually means it's fairly stable in atmospheric flight. What that means is as we pitch and yaw and roll, the pressure is going to be on the back of the ship, and that will try to make it stable and point forward. But this stability is actually what gives it, what can give you some trouble in atmosphere when you're trying to fly it. Alright, we are here in coupled mode on Microtech at about 1,000 meters. Coupled mode can be really difficult, especially for the Corsair to fly. The flight computer tries to automatically stabilize the craft, and with the unique aerodynamic shape that the Corsair has, it can be a real struggle. So here I'm going to throttle up to full. As we go faster, there's going to be more drag on the ship, and actually the way the ship currently is, there's a slight nose down input. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of pitch up, just to maintain level flight and maintain our altitude. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to yaw. So as you can see, the yaw, the nose is actually pitching downward. What's happening there is the aerodynamics are pushing down on the nose as we yaw, and it's causing us to dip. In coupled mode, that can be a problem. So what we're actually going to do is lower the throttle, and then that'll reduce some of the drag. But so turning with yaw doesn't really work in coupled mode, and it can be a struggle. Coupled mode automatically compensates for gravity and some of the atmospheric imbalances. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disengage coupled mode. What that means is the flight computer is no longer compensating for gravity. So here I'm now manually compensating for gravity by giving a strafe up input. Remember when we were up in space and we saw the amount of thrust that the thrusters gave? It was about, I think, 2.2 upward. Well, down in thick atmosphere, that's actually reduced by up to about, it goes down to about 60% of the original thrust value. So right now, this is me giving full upward strafe. You can see I can just barely raise my nose. So there's 2 ways to stay aloft. There's using the thrusters, which is what we're doing now, and then there's lift. If you look at the Corsair's atmospheric profile from the front, you can see in level flight, the wings are basically dead on with the direction of travel. So there's the least amount of drag, and that means we'll have the least amount of air resistance, but it means we're also not getting lift. The way Star Citizen is set up is the wings and lifting bodies don't really produce lift unless you have a higher angle of attack, which means your nose is above the direction of travel. So here, what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to pitch up so the nose is above the direction of travel, and I'm going to let off the strafe input almost completely. As you can see, I'm pitched way up here, maybe 15 degrees or more, but I'm not giving any strafe up input. And if you look at the altimeter, we're pretty much holding our altitude. So what that means is with this high angle of attack, maybe 15-20 degrees, we're actually getting enough lift to fly level. But you can see because of the extra drag, our speeds drop to about 100 meters a second, whereas before we were going about 150. But with that, what that means is, because what we want to do for turning and maneuvering is have a higher turn rate. So because our thrusters aren't too strong, we're going to want to rely on this lift in a turn to have a higher turn rate. So giving that strafe input back again, we're going to level out. All right, so next, so that's what happens if the nose is above the TVI, the direction of travel. Let's put the nose below the TVI and what happens. So I'm giving full strafe up input right now, but you can see with the nose below the TVI, we're actually descending. We're not even climbing at all. And that's because if you look relative to our direction of travel, the drag is actually doing the opposite of what we were doing before. It's pushing on the back of those wings from the front, and that's actually preventing us from pitching forward. So for maneuvering, you kind of want to, you want to make sure your nose is above this TVI if you want to take advantage of lift. Let's see how this works for yaw turns. The Corsair's unique design with the wings on the left side, that actually means we can use aerodynamics to turn. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to yaw right. You can see that pushes the nose down a bit, but now I'm going to apply full right strafe. So now you can see our turn rate has massively increased. What's happening here with yawing and strafing, I have to counter the roll a little bit. If you look at the design of the Corsair, as I strafe to the right almost fully, the aerodynamics are pushing on the left wing. So those left wings are basically functioning as a tail. So even though there's no control surfaces right now in game, the Corsair's unique design means you actually kind of have a tail surface. So here we are traveling forward, about 140 meters a second. I'm going to apply full left strafe as well. You can see I'm not yawing at all, but that is actually yawing the ship to the left. As I push the ship left, we're encountering more drag on the back of the ship than the front, and that's actually yawing me forward. Now as I add yaw, we're using the thrusters to rotate the ship, and the strafe left is putting more torque on the back of the ship, and that's actually going to turn us in the direction we want to go. So this is not the most high-speed turn, but it is one way to turn the Corsair with yaw. You want full strafe input. This is something that can actually be trickier to do with coupled modes. That's why we're sticking with decoupled, where we're ignoring what the flight computer would want to do in coupled mode, and we're just applying full strafe. Now, if we want to go right, yaw and strafe. Okay, now if we remember from being up in space, the Corsair could only do about 1.7 Gs left and right. Well, we're reduced to about 60% of that thrust. So here I'm going to attempt to roll slowly, just correcting a bit. What that means, I'm applying full left strafe right now, and I'm just barely countering gravity. What that means, the Corsair can fly rolled completely, and that's going to be important for when we start turning. But let's talk about rolling first, because you're going to need to roll to get into a full bank to maximize your turn rate. So if you can see a peak in the distance, I'm going to try to keep the crosshair and our vector indicator pointed at that. So as I start rolling right, see the ship has a tendency to nose up and down. So I'm actually compensating with the, now I have gone to strafe down, strafe right, and that's causing the nose to pitch due to the shape. But with a lot of stick movement, you can keep the Corsair balanced, and you're going to want to keep it balanced like this. The closer you keep the nose to the TVI, you're minimizing the drag because of all of those huge wings. So you can see we're not slowing down a lot. We are slowing down a little bit as we roll. So let's try a 90-degree roll, switching from vertical strafe to horizontal strafe, mostly, and now we're rolled 90. Okay, so if we want to turn, if we have our nose directly on TVI, we're not going to get a lot of lift. So let's just try it just with strafe up. So with strafe up, I'm getting a turn rate out of strafe up, and I'm applying just enough pitch to keep the nose on the vector indicator. What that's doing is that's minimizing the amount of drag we get, and it's keeping our speed as high as possible. So you can see we're going at about 155, and again, I've got full right strafe to counter gravity. We're heading up to about 160. If you check out the G meter on the lower right, that acceleration is going to sort of tell you how hard we're accelerating into our turn. So you can see this is about a 1.2 G turn. So it's because we're rolled 90, we're not using that 1 G of acceleration to fight gravity, and we're instead using it to turn. So let's increase our pitch. So we're going to pitch above the TVI, and you can see that G meter is increasing. Our speed is dropping, but once we get to about that same angle of attack, we're basically getting 1 G from the thrusters, and we're getting another 1 G from the lift. That same lift that was keeping us in straight and level flight is now giving us this lovely turn rate. So we're holding at about 90 meters a second, but we're now in like a 2.4, almost 2.5 G turn. And again, I'm not boosting, don't have VTOL, we're just using the aerodynamics. I'm going to release pitch, go back to the TVI. Now our speed has gone back up again, the drag has decreased, and our turn rate is now closer to a G again. We're going to roll level. Now when we're rolling, we actually get a lot of drag on these wings. So you can see when I roll, the roll rate is a little slow, especially at the start of the roll. It does speed up, but this is a ship that even when you release roll, takes a while to come back to level. One way we can increase that turn rate, we're straight and level flight now, we're going to hit VTOL mode. So VTOL mode, you'll remember, rotated 2 of those thrusters downward. Remember in space it doubled our acceleration upward, so now I only need about half of my strafe input to stay level. And you see our speed has only dropped down to about 130, when before it was maybe 150, 160. So here when I apply full strafe, you can see I now have a lot more power to go upwards. So to sort of show off that drag, now look, I can pitch the nose about this far down. I'm getting that maybe 2G of vertical strafe. And what's actually happening is we're getting lift pushing on the back wings, and that's keeping us level. So if you're a fan of strafing runs, this is actually one way you can do a strafing run, by full up strafe, pitch down, holding level, and then your guns are pointed down and you're having level flight forward. But if we reverse that, if we get the nose above the TVI, now see, we don't have the forward thrust anymore to stay level with that high angle of attack because we have less forward thrust. But by combining vertical strafe and lift, we will be able to massively increase our turn rate. So here we have VTOL mode on. We're doing our level, rolled 90, holding altitude. So now to start our turn, I'm going to strafe up. You can see that TVI is moving a lot faster. We're a little slower, but see, even just chasing that TVI, I actually have a faster turn rate than we did before. So we still have that 2G turn, but we're holding about 130 meters a second. That's because as we turn, we don't need as much thrust going forward. What we really need is this upward thrust to sort of push us through the turn. Now as I increase pitch, see if I can get us down to about that 90 meters a second we had before. Drop down to maybe 75 meters a second, but we have this 2.6, 2.5 G turn. Just pushing us through. So these wings, they're creating not just lift, but they are also causing drag. So one thing you'll notice, if you imagine from the forward, so from a forward perspective, this is what it's like flying forward with that lift. You can see the profile of the ship is massively expanded. We're getting drag on the nose, we're getting drag on the wings, and that's going to slow us down. But as I fold the wings, which is something the Corsair can do, you can see even when pitched downward, that cross-section of those wings basically goes away in this pitch axis. So that means is as we pitch, we're not getting that lift, but we're also not getting that drag anymore. And that extends to rolling. So one thing the Corsair can do, you can get a faster roll actually by folding those wings in before you do a roll maneuver. That's because if you look at it, we're just not getting nearly the same amount of drag on our wings. And so now you can see with the wings folded, we're getting less drag in this turn. Our speed is a little slower, but we're still able to pull that like roughly 2.5 G turn. But rolling out of it, pretty fast as well. Oh, now you can see my nose is below the TVI, so it's going to impact my turn rate. Now that we're flying straight and level, we can practice using boost. So what I'm going to fold the wings back down. Turn VTOL mode off. Just go back into our normal flight. Here we are, straight and level. I'm going to nose above TVI a little bit so that I don't have to strafe up as much to stay level. It's going to drop our speed. So I'm going to roll to the side. Increase that strafe up. So boost can almost double your thruster. Boost can almost double your thruster output at the expense of massively increased fuel use. So here, I'm going to boost. You can see, look how much faster that TVI moves. So I'm going to try to chase. So I'm going to keep pitching to stay ahead of that TVI. And see how high I can get that. Like, we're maintaining about 112. We're pulling this 4G turn. Lastly, I'm going to put power all the way to boost, so it's going to recharge faster and drain a little slower. At this point here at these mountains, that sunset, we're just going to see how quickly we can do a 360 degree turn. Rolling. Playing lateral strafe. And there we go. Now, let's kick into VTOL. The thing is, the boost does recharge a little slow on the Corsair, so you're really going to want to use it just for small amounts. There's the sun. Let's do our 360. Let's roll. Boost. Chase that TVI. 4.7 degree turn. Much faster with that VTOL in there. Straighten out. Lastly, let's add that wing fold into the mix. Full boost. So full pitch, full strafe forward, lateral strafe. Don't need to lateral strafe as much because of the VTOL or because of the boost. And there it is. Now in decoupled mode, you do need to compensate for gravity on your own, but the main difference with coupled mode is that you are in sort of full control of your acceleration power and you don't need to worry about what the flight system is doing. The flight system has trouble keeping the Corsair stable, so if you're lucky enough to have dual sticks and can do full analog input, decoupled will make it much easier to control this craft. Just remember that you are going to get torque depending on where your nose is compared to your vector indicator, and that if you're trying to yaw, you also want to use strafe with your yaw to take advantage of that tail. And here with the wings folded, you can see we're actually getting a lot more resistance to the yaw. So unfolding the wings will make that yaw turn much easier. The last thing to note is that the Corsair is not super fast in atmosphere. It's significantly slower than something like a Hercules C2. And it's also very thirsty. You can see just doing this tutorial, I'm down to about 50% fuel. So ways you can mitigate that is you will get a higher speed and can use less fuel if you increase altitude. Because the air resistance is lower. The other thing is that by reducing thrust and not going full power, you will actually reduce your fuel use significantly. Also, if you're on a descent, you can take advantage of the lift that the Corsair gets, and just sort of let gravity and lift pull you down, and don't worry about throttling forward as much. So you're basically letting gravity do the work of pulling you down and saving fuel. Thank you, pilots. Hopefully this helped you a bit with maneuvering the Drake Corsair in atmosphere. If you have any comments, leave them down below, and I will do my best to help. Take care, and I will see you in the verse.